My name is Brittany. Standing in front of the newly opened community center, I can still hear the applause ringing in my ears. The sun shines brightly, and the building behind me is filled with the sounds of people, just as my grandfather, Oscar, had envisioned. Victor, my father, stands to my left, his practiced smile fixed on his face. But this time, I don't care about his approval. I've come a long way, and this moment is mine. I remember the day of Oscar's funeral like it was yesterday. The rain had been pouring since dawn, and the gray New York sky seemed to seep into my very soul as we left St. Patrick's Church. Oscar was more than just my grandfather. He was the light in a life often overshadowed by my father's harsh words and cold silences. My father, Victor, was a successful businessman. He was always strict, with a no-nonsense attitude. At the funeral, he stood at the front, accepting condolences with a firm handshake and a measured smile. For a brief moment, I thought grief might have softened him. But that hope was short-lived. Hours later, when the mourners had left and the smell of damp flowers still lingered in the air, I found myself in the estate's drawing room. I was sipping cold coffee, lost in memories as I stared at the old oak mantel where Oscar used to rest his arm while telling me stories. Victor walked in, his expression stripped of the polite mask he'd worn all day. "It's done," he said flatly. "The estate transfer is official. $800 million is now in my name." He said it as casually as if he were talking about the weather, a small smirk playing on his lips. I nodded slowly, not knowing what to say. But he didn't give me a chance. "You're useless now," he declared. The words hung in the air, too absurd to believe at first. I stared at him in disbelief. "Excuse me?" I managed to say. He continued, his tone cutting through the air. "You've coasted long enough. Pack your things. I want you out of the house by morning." I felt a numbness wash over me. This was the man who had taught me to drive, who had lectured me about success, now looking at me like I was an unwanted burden. I forced myself to stand up straight, my chest tightening, but I refused to let my voice shake. "Fine," I said, and walked out of the room. The echo of my footsteps followed me down the long hallway to the bedroom that never really felt like home. Growing up, I lived in a house where silence was a form of control. Victor's rules were strict and absolute. No slamming doors, no talking back, and never question his decisions. My earliest memories of him were filled with corrections. My posture was too slouched, my tone was too sharp, and my dreams were too unrealistic. By the time I was 12, I learned to keep my achievements to myself. If I brought home an A, he'd ask why it wasn't an A+. If I won a debate competition, he'd wonder how many others didn't try hard enough. Praise from him was a rare thing, and when it came, it felt more like a formality than a real celebration. Oscar was different. His presence was like a warm embrace on a cold day. He never pushed me to be perfect. Instead, he asked me what I wanted and listened intently to my answers. When I was 16, I told him I wanted to work in investment banking to understand how money and power moved in the world. Victor scoffed, saying it was a man's world. But Oscar just smiled and encouraged me to learn everything I could. Years later, when I was accepted into a top-tier business school, Victor dismissed it as a waste of time and money. I remember sitting on the porch with Oscar that night, holding my acceptance letter, torn about whether to go. He sipped his lemonade and quietly slid an envelope across the table. Inside was a cashier's check large enough to cover my first-year tuition. "Don't tell him," he said. "This is between us. Consider it an investment in someone worth investing in." Now, standing in my childhood bedroom with a half-packed suitcase, I thought of that night and the pride in his eyes. Victor could take away the house, but he couldn't take away the foundation Oscar had given me. As I reached for another hanger, I felt something hard shift inside the lining of my old bookshelf. The house no longer felt like mine. In the days after the funeral, the warmth Oscar had brought seemed to vanish, replaced by a cold and unwelcoming atmosphere. Doors that were always open were now locked: the library, the study, and even the sunroom. The staff I'd known for years avoided my eyes. Maria, the housekeeper, who used to share cookies with me, now only gave me curt nods and rushed off when I asked if something was wrong, mumbling about Mr. Thompson's instructions. At dinner, Victor talked as if I wasn't there. He discussed his plans for the estate, renovations, and new investments, making it clear I had no place in his future. His voice carried the satisfaction of someone getting rid of what he considered useless. Back in my room, I tried to focus on packing. My fingers ran along the spines of the books I'd kept since high school, seeking comfort. One thick business biography Oscar had given me on my 20th birthday slid forward more easily than the others. When I pulled it out, I felt something small and hard inside. I opened it and found a sealed envelope hidden between the last few pages. My name, Brittany, written in Oscar's steady hand, stood out against the cream-colored paper. I sat on the edge of the bed and carefully tore open the seal. Inside was a single piece of paper with the words, "The will protects those who protect others." There was no explanation, just this cryptic line that made my heart skip a beat. I read it again and again, as if more meaning would appear. Oscar had hidden it for me, not for Victor. I folded the note back into the envelope and put it in my bag, my mind racing with questions. A few days later, I moved into a small apartment in downtown New York. It was tiny, barely big enough for me to stretch my arms without hitting the walls, but it was mine. I sold some of the jewelry Victor had given me over the years, gifts that were more for show than sentiment. The money was enough to cover the deposit and the first month's rent. I worked as a financial analyst, and I set up my laptop on the small kitchen table, trying to create a sense of normalcy. At night, I would often take out the envelope and reread Oscar's words. They didn't seem like something he'd say casually, and they definitely weren't meant for Victor. I started to dig into public records, probate filings, and old news articles about estates with unusual clauses. Most of it was just noise, but every now and then, I found something that made my heart race. There were trusts that released funds only under specific conditions, and wills tied to community projects. Oscar was always meticulous in everything he did, so it was very likely that his will was the same. 3 days after I moved in, my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something made me answer. "Brittany Thompson," a crisp, professional voice said. "This is Linda Carter. I was your grandfather's attorney. We need to talk about his will. It's quite unusual." I sat up straight. "How unusual?" I asked. She gave a short, knowing laugh. "Let's just say your father's going to have a very difficult time. Can you come to my office tomorrow?" I looked at the envelope on the table, my mind already racing. Linda Carter's office was nothing like I expected. It was modern, with clean lines and a wall of neatly labeled files. She motioned for me to sit down and then folded her hands, looking at me as if she knew more than she was letting on. "I've been waiting for you to call," she began. "Your grandfather anticipated the dynamics in your family. He put his entire estate, worth $800 million, into a trust. Your father can't access a single cent unless certain conditions are met." I leaned forward, my pulse quickening. "What conditions?" I asked. She smiled slightly. "He must complete a community redevelopment project that meets city approval and Oscar's philanthropic standards. And you must be the co-executive, with equal authority and signature rights." I sat back, trying to process what she was saying. "You're saying he can't do it without me?" I asked. "Correct. There's more," she continued. "During the 12 months it takes to complete the project, there can be no lawsuits between you and your father, no public estrangement, and no formal withdrawal from the arrangement by either party. If there's any violation, the trust will dissolve. Half of the money will go to the charities Oscar named, and the other half will go directly to you." I thought about Victor in his study, so smug and certain he had one. I thought about him telling me I was useless. "Oscar really planned this," I murmured. Yes, he did. He wanted to make sure the person he trusted most was in a position to protect his legacy, and that person wasn't your father, Linda said. I traced my fingers along the edge of the desk. When does Victor find out? I asked. She smiled slightly. He already has. I felt a sense of anticipation. I knew it wouldn't be long before he came to me. And I was right. Less than 24 hours later, there was a sharp knock on my apartment door. When I opened it, Victor stood there, expensively dressed but looking a bit disheveled. His face was pale, and there was a thin sheen of sweat on his forehead. Brittany, he said, forcing a smile. Thought we should talk as a family. I stepped aside without a word, letting him into the small living room. He looked around, his eyes lingering on the second-hand furniture as if it was an insult. The bank tells me there's been a misunderstanding, he began, sitting down on the sofa. The funds are tied up in some kind of trust. Ridiculous red tape. His tone was light, but I could hear the strain in his voice. It's not a misunderstanding, I said. It's the will. He waved his hand dismissively. Your grandfather was sentimental. I'm sure we can work around it. He leaned forward, trying to soften his voice. You and I are family. We've had our differences, but we can work together on this. It'll be good for both of us. Oscar's words flashed through my mind, don't react. Negotiate. What exactly are you proposing? I asked calmly. That you sign whatever is needed so I can move forward. You'll get something, of course, he said. I looked him in the eye. That's not how it's written. His smile faded. Brittany, I'm offering you an easy way out. You think you can run a multi-million-dollar project without me? You'll sink us both. The threat was there, but I didn't flinch. If you want the money, you'll follow the terms. All of them, I said. A muscle in his jaw twitched. For a moment, I thought he might explode, but then he stood up, straightening his jacket. Think about it, he said, and walked out without another look. I knew he'd be back. 2 days later, I had the agreement ready. Linda had helped me refine it, with each clause as precise as Oscar's will. Victor would publicly acknowledge me as co-executive, cover my living costs for the duration of the project, and transfer 3 specific estate properties into my name, with no conditions or reversals. When I slid the document across Linda's conference table, Victor's eyes skimmed it and then met mine. You can't be serious, he said. Every word, I replied. He leaned back, crossing his arms. I'm not signing this. You're extorting me. I didn't blink. The will is extorting you. I'm just giving you a way forward. For the next week, he stalled, claiming he was busy with other matters, sending back pages with red ink scribbled all over them. He even consulted another lawyer, but after one meeting, the lawyer quietly confirmed the truth. Oscar's language in the will was airtight. Without my cooperation, Victor's $800 million might as well have been buried. When he finally returned to Linda's office, he was quieter. Not defeated, but there was a heaviness in his posture and a tightness around his mouth. He picked up the pen, rolled it between his fingers, and signed each page with quick, sharp strokes. Linda notarized the document, her expression neutral, but I caught a faint glimmer of satisfaction in her eyes. Victor pushed the signed packet towards me, his knuckles white. I hope you know what you're doing, Brittany, he said. I do, I replied, tucking the agreement into my folder. We stood there, the air between us heavy with unspoken words. He left without shaking my hand, the door closing behind him. For the first time in years, I felt the balance of power shift. And this was just the beginning. The waterfront lot was a mess, a patch of cracked asphalt and overgrown weeds. But Oscar's plans were grand. He envisioned glass walls overlooking the harbor, classrooms for job training, and space for local markets on weekends. From the first week, I made it my business to know every detail. I walked the site with the contractors every morning, reviewed invoices at night, and built relationships with the city officials whose signatures we needed. The more I was involved, the more the crews looked to me for decisions. Victor hated it. He showed up late to meetings, proposed budget-cutting ideas that ignored both building codes and Oscar's vision. Whenever I refused, he'd mutter about me being impossible to work with. But he couldn't shut me out. The will made sure of that. The press loved our story, the Thompson family uniting to honor the patriarch's dream. They took pictures of us smiling side by side, but behind those smiles, every conversation was a negotiation. By the 11th month, the center's steel frame was complete, and the glass panels caught the morning sun. Victor stood with me on the balcony overlooking the water, watching the crews set the final supports. "You've handled yourself better than I expected," he said, his words clipped but genuine. "Better than you wanted," I replied. He gave a short, humorless laugh. "Maybe." It wasn't trust, and it wasn't forgiveness, but it was an acknowledgement that I wasn't the liability he'd thought I was. In a few weeks, the project would be finished, and the will's conditions would be met. The ribbon-cutting ceremony was a huge success. City leaders, reporters, and families from the neighborhood gathered under the bright spring sun, and the new community center shone behind us. Victor stood to my left, his hands clasped, his smile practiced. The cameras loved him, but the speeches were mine to give, as Oscar had stipulated. When it was my turn, I stepped up to the podium. I spoke about Oscar's belief that wealth was meaningless if it didn't help others. I thanked the contractors, the volunteers, and the community who had worked with us. I didn't mention Victor. The applause started slowly and then grew into a warm, steady roar. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Victor's expression tighten, his jaw set as the focus stayed on me. By the end of the day, the trust's conditions were fulfilled. Victor would get his fortune, but I had something more valuable. I had 3 prime estate properties in my name and the public recognition for bringing Oscar's vision to life. As the crowd dispersed, I walked away down the side path, my heels clicking against the new brickwork. The center stood behind me, alive with activity, just as Oscar had dreamed. I didn't look back at Victor. I didn't need to. I'd taken the part of my family's legacy worth keeping and left the rest in the past.